Hi, everyone. I'll give you a moment to connect to sound. Hello, and welcome to the Broken Rails 1151st New Social Environment. I'm Min, a Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Keltie Ferris, Arturo Herrera, and Martha Joseph. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Keltie Ferris is an artist whose unique approach to abstraction maps the catalytic qualities of medium and technique onto expressions of physicality, energy, and change. His works thrum with a vibrant use of color and a diverse deployment of pictorial forms and textural applications. Arturo Herrera is an artist who creates colorful abstract paintings using the strategies of fragmentation and layering adapted from his earlier collage-based work. His diverse body of work, most prominently utilizing collage, felt sculpture, and wall painting, references the complex legacy of abstraction using modernist visual languages. And our host, Martha Joseph, is a curator and writer specializing in contemporary art and performance. At the Museum of Modern Art, she is part of the curatorial team for the Kravis Studio, MoMA's space for performance and time-based art. Before joining MoMA, she held curatorial positions at the Whitney and Mass MoCA. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Martha, to get us started.
Thank you for that introduction, Min, and thank you to the whole team at the Rail for inviting me to moderate this discussion today. Hi to everybody who's tuning in. Keltie and Arturo, I'm grateful to speak with you today to talk through gesture, embodiment, and bring your approaches to abstraction into conversation with the work of artist and choreographer Trisha Brown. As I've been thinking about the exhibition that you're in, that's currently on view at Sycamore Jenkins, I encourage everyone here to go see it if you have not already. I've been thinking about each of your practices, and it's helpful for me to tend to process to the different ways that each of you considers making gestural abstraction. You each have a distinct relationship to movement and line and the way it's translated to a two-dimensional surface. And with the counterpoint of Trisha Brown, action feels key. We could think of something like the exhibition Out of Actions Between Performance and Object at LA MoCA in the late 90s as a historical predecessor for some of the conversations that we might have here today. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized all the work in the show occupies a different point on a Mobius strip. On the one hand, there's a conversation about the choreographic as an image-based strategy through Trisha Brown, and then there's a conversation about image making or painting as a gestural strategy. And we will soon pull up a PowerPoint and look at images together and kind of move seamlessly back and forth between those two points of view in a way that, for me, really creates a playful and productive counterpoint. So setting up expectations around gesture in the image, and then in the next moment, kind of challenging the expectations that you just set up. Thank you, Min, for the slides. So the first image you see is if you walk into the gallery, this is the first gallery, and we'll kind of take a walk through the spaces and begin here with, on the left, a Trisha Brown work titled Untitled Montpellier from 2002. If you could go to the next slide. Susan Rosenberg describes Trisha Brown's practice as investigating the various ways in which the body could be said to think. And from that, a work like this becomes, for me, almost like the handwriting of the dancer. Brown made important drawings in the 70s, earlier in her career, that teased out some of her ideas around geometry and the cube and the dancing body that were the basis for some of her most important choreographic works. And we'll come back to this later, but those early drawings were a way to kind of create a new movement language and functioned more like scores. But these later drawings, like the one on the screen, function like the inverse of a score, rather than setting expectations that are laid out in advance. It's the index, it's the residue, the marks you see are descriptive rather than proscriptive. It's an after image of a dance. Next slide. So I almost hate to show these images because it feels like you're um, what's the phrase about seeing how the sausage is made or but this is Trisha Brown creating works from this time period. This is from Philadelphia in 2003, but she regularly documented the creation of these drawings, and they're quite easily found on the internet if you'd like to even watch more live videos. I think there's one of her from the Walker Art Center creating one. And what's striking to me about seeing these process images is one, the sense of orientation. You see her actually working on the ground. So even though the work is shown on the wall in a given orientation, it's not necessarily created in that way. And then you see her overall range of motion, the incredible physicality of it. The charcoal that she's holding is an extension of her limbs. Um, and looking back at the work, then you, I think, really see how well it captures that dynamism of touch. Like there are hard lines and soft lines, footprints, smudges. You really feel that sense of bodily rhythm against the paper. Next slide. So, of course, we can think of someone like Jackson Pollock, and the Harold Rosenberg quote that action becomes its own representation in abstract expressionism. Um, Next slide. But we could also think of other artists kind of closer to Trisha Brown in the Judson Dance Theater milieu, like Carolee Schneemann in this work, Trackings, um, which also became a standalone installation titled Up to and Including Her Limits. She's performing, and as she's performing, simultaneously drawing on this canvas on the ground. So thinking it's a moment in her career where she's fundamentally rethinking what a painting can be, how a painting can expand out both in time and space. Next slide. Um, and Keltie, to bring you in, this work by you is in that first gallery in the Sycamore Jenkins show, which I realize I didn't say the title. The title is The Grand Gesture. And this work, when I saw it, had for me just such a vibrant rhythm to it, a momentum, a vibrational quality that exuded a kind of performativity, um, despite your practice being as a painter, not a performance artist. But I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about this work, how it was created, and your approach to it.
Yeah, this comes from like a long or an ongoing drawing practice that I have that is sort of based on a set of, I don't want to say automatic moves, but rhythmic rhythmic gestures, lots of repetition, and a lot of going over the drawing. Like this one, for instance, is made from the same movement over and over again, radiating from a center, and then everything is there's an attempt at erasing it, which has sort of created these rays, or I guess that's where it started from, was an attempt to erase these drawings that then produced these ray marks going through the drawing. So I think of it as two drawings going through each other. Anyway, and that's been a basis of that spawned a whole body of work, and this is an example of one of them.
Yeah, thank you. Hearing you talk about marking and then also erasing, like attempting to erase a drawing. Presence and absence are so much a part of the Trisha Brown work too, that this is paired across from. Um, do you think about it in that way?
Yeah, well, I sort of think of it as two marks going through each other. I mean, the erasure is such a failed thing. I mean, it's done with an eraser, and so but it's oil stick on paper, which is very, very difficult to erase, and it's quite a bit of it. So everyone always asks me, how do I do that mark? And no one ever guesses that it's done with an eraser, an eraser, excuse me. So, but yes, I do think of it as like an attempt to take away and a failed attempt that then produces something else much more exciting, which is like these sort of parallel vibrations, which I tend to in my mark making for some reason.
Yeah, yeah. And color is also so important, which we'll get into later, both with you and then also you, Arturo. How are you thinking about color here?
Oh, me? How am I? I think of this for me is a relatively pared down uh, palette, which is a direction I've been going after years of sort of being interested in making paintings that included as many colors as possible and sort of have almost like a non-programmatic palette. I've I've been playing with more simple color pairings and this being just like a red blue dichotomy. Um, I don't know. I don't have anything really profound to say about it other than I'm accepting limitations more than
Yeah.
yeah.
Fair enough. We'll get back to color later, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
totally.
Totally. Uh, let's go to the next slide. And so then in the next gallery, um, your work comes into contact with yours, Arturo, and we see this work here on the left. Next slide. Which kind of extends that really linear quality, but then takes us into kind of a new dimension or a new place when it comes to questions of representation as we start to actually see images kind of slip in and out of this work. Arturo, how did you come to a work like this?
Well, I mean, during that time, 2001, 2003, 2005, I did a lot of works with white paper, allowing the negative space to be also very prominent. So here is graphite on paper, and the other early work from 2003 is a cutout collage on white paper. So this kind of plays tribute and also mimics this dripping technique basically. But like in the case with Trisha Brown, is very controlled. So it's kind of perverse kind of drawing to have a black mark made seemingly with a brush because it's very liquid, everything is round, everything is flowing, and yet it's totally structured. And the negative spaces are, to me, play an important role in the other piece as well in this one, because you could inform, the negative spaces inform the shape, which is basically shapes our rhythm, body rhythms. And we tend to kind of appropriate this shape or that shape and try to get into the journey, or how do I start the drawing? Where do I start? You have basically like a thing in Keltie's work and Trisha's, it's very kind of generous because it is there for you for the taking. And you are free to start anywhere and to be able to make your own kind of, journey within the piece. So basically that's what it is. Here is very linear, very controlled, very precise, even though it's very chaotic. It's opposite of that, like Trisha, because Trisha likes structure. She worked with structure all the time. So that's how I wanted to contrast those two feels, and also to put the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in the mixer, in the blender, basically, because all the elements are there. The castle, the house, the dwarves, the forest, the hunter, but there is all now, you're going to take it from where you want to go to be able to read what you want to read from. I'm not dictating exactly what you need to see there. So.
Yeah, I really like how you're mentioning this like controlled or structured aspect of it, and also in relation to Trisha's work, because I feel like there is sometimes this false idea that improvisation and structure are kind of um, separated, when in fact they're just like different relationships to a set of systems, or to control, right? Like a certain number of parameters that you kind of are working within. Um, in terms of your own construction of this and the controlled nature of it, how do you like map it out in advance? Do you see where lines take you? How does that work for you in terms of your process?
Well, I mean, it's great to have in the show the early works by Trisha and then the large dimension stage-like works by Trisha, because I mean, a work like this has to be planned. So I think at the beginning, Trisha also planned the points in space where the dancers could be, or they probably could move there and there. And also in this one, I had to plan it carefully exactly how I wanted it, because I didn't want too much information on a specific part. I wanted the whole thing to be just like one kind of like burst into what happened here. So the control and the structure of it is very important to be able to get this kind of message, basically. So there's a relation between Trisha and me in this case, because these are not like the late works of Trisha, but the control from the early works is about positioning people, elements, shapes, kind of body parts in there that you are able to start making the dance, basically, the performance. So.
Right. And there's also like a fragmentation, or like maybe not fragmentation, but isolation of a single body part. If you think of some of her choreographies, or, isolation of certain kind of, yeah, their hats. It's the seven dwarves in this image that you're kind of riffing on.
This is all the whole Snow White and Seven Dwarfs.
Uh-huh.
The whole tale is there, the forest, the hunter, the drawers where the dishes were, Snow White sleeping, everybody's there, the animals, the whole story is there, but totally, blended into this kind of dripping painting technique, basically. So it's kind of perverse, just like the tale itself. So.
Yeah, and it also like collapses time, right?
Yeah, yeah. And yet it could disappear at any time because it is based on all these empty spaces that make the drawing. All these negative spaces are the ones that could just go in like in a cloud or in a whiff or so. So that's why the paper on the two early works was so important, because I wanted just minimal confrontation between the image and the background, basically. So.
Let's go to the next slide. And we'll get back to Trisha momentarily, but this one is kind of on the next wall. And so, Keltie, if we want to come back to you, I mean, if we were talking about collapsing in the last image, one thing that struck me with this one, and just the entire show in person, but particularly in this work, was just like the incredible texture and three-dimensionality to some of the pieces in the show, or at least certainly in your work.
Yeah, I mean, one reason I was really excited to be in the show with Arturo was I always think about how he or I've been, I think about how he's approaches negative space, and a lot of these paintings that I have in this show are I don't know, me contending with the idea of negative space being a major player or becoming sculpture. And so these relief, like they become relief. And that's just me laying down, building stencils around the drawing. So it's a lot of cutouts and sort of like working with blades and working very slowly from this larger, pretty wild drawing and then sort of slowing down and building the background to become a new literal foreground. And this was the first painting that I did that with on a white ground. So it was about white or blankness coming forward. And also I've done it before with where the line was made from spray paint line, but this is the first one where I had done it from one of my drawings, even though it's a drawing on canvas, where it's these pastels that have been erased, and then sort of finding these jagged, almost hairy negative spaces and building them forward. And I think a lot of my work is about that, that gesture or that mark coming up against the ground, and then they having some sort of vibrational relationship of who's more important, or and flipping positions. And so I don't know, this is my most recent change to this I don't know, this dichotomy I've been thinking of for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, also nice that you framed it that way, because I've been thinking more and more how this show is a drawing show. I mean,
Yeah,
in some ways quite literally, and in some ways not as literally.
totally. Yeah, I used to build my paintings mostly out of dots, and recently I've become more interested in like the wandering, searching nature of line, and both of which, when I use dots, I used to layer them on top of each other, and now I like layering lines on top of each other. And I think of cross-hatching and lines going through each other, like sort of as vectors going through each other. But on the other hand, I'm hesitant to say all this because it's also like, I'm not saying this is the right way to think of it, but this is how I think of it, or what motivates me. But I'm drawn to people's, what they, their interpretation of it. But it's this, I don't know, I'll stop there for the moment.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, this we'll come to these Trisha works later. Next slide. I want to pick up on what you were saying about layering, Keltie, because we see that so nicely, Arturo, in your collage works. If we could go to the next slide. This series is a series of set design studies, and I know you think so much about dance. Like, you obviously see a lot of dance, Arturo. You were telling me just the other day how you were going to see dance. Could you tell us a bit about your idea around these set designs?
Well, I always loved dance since I was a kid, and I wasn't able to go to dance school, but my dream was to really either be a dancer or choreographer or something like that. So I always been fascinated by the whole history of dance, and I always got to be able to be part of it, at least from the stage point of view. And I wanted to kind of pay tribute to kind of sets that I would like to see, or colors that I would like to see, or shapes that could be backgrounds for dancers or a performance, basically. So I use these very abstract shapes, this layering, and they're all fragmented, of course, but they all have also pictures of dancers in it, a leg and a hand, or whatever, or a jump, or because I wanted to include the dancers there. But the pieces speak two ways. One is that they could be sets that move up and down, or left and right, or they could be stationary for a specific needs of the choreographer. And also some of the elements, the collage elements, could serve as stands-in for dancers, or for groups of people that are in front of this other thing that is happening. So it's not exactly very rational, but it's, for me, a way to peer into an audience from the stage design, from the seating area of what I would like to see, basically. On colors and of how this could be behind this one or that behind the other one. So to me, it would be fantastic to see some of these moving, basically, or with light or with something, and to have dancers there. That would make it fantastic. So it's my kind of small tribute to dance or the history of set design or something. I mean, they're very primitive, but it's just a kind of something to honor them by. So,
if we go to the next slide, we can see a couple details.
right.
I love that you mentioned those body parts of the dancers, and as I was looking at them, some of them you can kind of tell, like you see, you can tell it's ballet or you can tell it's modern based on whether they're on point or not. And in your collage practice, you use or you take images from a lot of books. Is that correct?
I mean, most of the collages I do used found material, basically, and also painted material or printed material that I collect, that I do in my own in the studio, basically. So it's a combination of found source imagery with fabric like felt, all of them, canvas, painting, drawing, all mixed together. So the fragmentation could actually provoke some kind of reading into, and the physical material, the physical aspect of the collages actually will inform also how you read the works, basically. But yeah, the layers is extremely important, I think, with Keltie too. And this is, to me, a fascination of, we don't know what's behind it. What was in front of this other fragment that kind of obscure this, but to create a new meaning or a new image or whatever. So, so yeah, you can see it's a very minimal, not too many pieces in each of the collages, 7, 8, or 9. Usually I do much more complicated things, but these require just kind of a minimal aspect to it. Big shapes that could be moved slowly or fast for a specific time and then disappear.
Yeah. And these are relatively modest in scale, but you kind of described them almost as if they're propositions for sets or an homage to the history of set design, which I thought was really, really nice. But have you created ones on a larger scale or thought about translating these to a larger scale?
Oh yeah. I need to somebody has to call and invite me or something. So it happened. I mean, Trisha did like 5 or 6 operas.
Right.
She did Winterreise. She did so many things with performers, orchestras, and singers, and operas. She did a lot. So there is hope. So
Yeah. I mean, and what's interesting to you? I'm always interested in visual artists who collaborate with performing artists in that way. Like time is such a different player, right, across the two different media, and like creating something that will be experienced with a particular set duration through the stage or the proscenium, right? Like changes your relationship to an image. But what for you is exciting about doing something like set design or collaborating with a performing artist?
well, I think because I think the set design and the dancers will collage each other, basically. For a moment, you have this music, movement, and some kind of art or form or shape or whatever that will actually create something that's larger than life. And then it will just go away. So to me, that will be fascinating that I could see it one time, how these things move in space, just like the dancers move in space. And when that clicks, I think, and Trisha made it click all the time with collaborations with artists, that is a magical thing that it doesn't happen all the time. It is difficult that it works, but when it works, it's magical, really. So that's the dream that I could see it one day with real dancers performing with it, So
Yeah, like a sharing of mutual visions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. If we go to the next slide, yeah. So then on the next wall is this back to this painting by you, Keltie. As you were talking, Arturo, and looking at these images, I like synesthesia comes to mind, the like um translation of image to sound or color to sound. Is that something either of you think about?
Sound, well, for the set designs, no, I wasn't thinking about any specific music with it. So for me, they're more like a presence on stage that could be manipulated, especially for the needs of the choreographer, basically. But I mean, Trisha used silence a lot, so they don't have to have music. So if they do, fine. If they don't, but it has to kind of work together. So.
Yeah, thank you. Next slide. Oh, next slide. Yeah, I wanted to get to this beautiful detail. And thank you, Keltie, for suggesting that we include these like really kind of detailed shots in these slides of like texture. Um, this one has so much motion in it, and yet uh, tell us about it. This one doesn't include any kind of spray paint. This is all
Well, actually, the dark lines are spray painted. So
okay.
it's sprayed oil paint to be exact through a gun. So that's why it says oil on vinyl paint. But yeah, I don't know what to say other than this is the most recent painting in the show. It's the most current thing I'm working on, and I've been thinking a lot about the intense, like sort of simplifying the intensity of color that I am drawn to usually, and I realize like just to go, blue is often people's favorite color, which I often find so interesting. Like and it's in like so much of the clothing that we wear, and it's a obviously the sky and the ocean, like the largest things in our world are blue. And I don't know. So I was meditating on the intensity and the love of that color, but I wanted it to be, I don't know, as as overwhelming as it could be, even in a relatively small painting, and to go more towards the darkness of blue rather than the I don't know. This stuff is so hard to talk about, but I mean, so I'm doing my best here. But the intent and to just bring it to make that color three-dimensional also, like with the frame and the relief bits as if it's coming towards you, or something that you want to touch that's sculptural and yet is like this intense optical experience. Hopefully it's a vibrational effect.
Yeah, I was going to ask if it was a custom frame because it feels you can't really even see so well in this image, but if you're in person and kind of can turn to the side, it feels like so you feel your hand in it, I guess.
Yeah, I paint the frames myself. I used to make them in the studio, but that's hasn't been possible lately. But yeah, we make them here, and so they're technically my frames. I guess they're part of the work. I guess is the way to put it. And yeah, I do think about sound, like maybe as like an intense, like overwhelming, like a wash of sound, especially this painting and others, like an intense, overwhelming uh, feeling that encompassing, like how a color or a sound could be maybe encompassing. And similarly, I don't know, just to relate to what Arturo was saying, is not so much with this painting in particular, but many paintings in my I've often thought of in terms of as sets, and I think of like that wash of color that is in the background behind sets with the lights, like that kind of glows through their various scrims, especially in sort of operatic settings. Anyway, the theatricality of light and color in a box is a metaphor for which I approach painting quite frequently.
Mm. Mm. That's nice. Next slide. Next slide. So this is the work that you mentioned earlier, Arturo, going back to the first one and kind of thinking about the two of them together in terms of like the way they play with that negative space and that real linear quality. And then, but this one is collage, correct?
Yes, the collage elements are all found. They're all commercially printed coloring books. And then I glued it on a piece of paper and then cut the design, of the piece. It is basically based on a little bit of Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, the castle. It's a German castle. Some of the animated Disney end up in Los Angeles, and then they have this Germanistic kind of thing. So this is from the original Sleeping Beauty. And I basically did the design, the drawing, and then I basically did a spill with ink on top of it. Then that was translated into a black and white shape, and then cut out like this. So what's missing is we don't know the content of the coloring books. Basically, it's painted, but I didn't do anything to it. I just took what was found and provided the colors like this. But whatever is left from these negative spaces is that you get a sense of information on this piece, basically. But it is almost like it's going to fly away, because it is basically strings of paper, basically, on a white background. And it's the negative space that informs the whole story. And it's fascinating that the drawing is so controlled of the Disney or the cartoon imagery with this free-flowing kind of mark making. And I wanted to contrast, unify them like this to see what kind of message or what kind of imagery I get. And a lot of people responded on following lines or beginning from the top to bottom or whatever. So I was glad that people were able to do their own kind of, trip on it, basically. So I think it's a very generous image. It's a very controlled image also. It's very ambivalent, but also very precise. So it has all those elements that I find fascinating when you present something like this, that people have references to it, and yet they cannot put the finger on it. And I think that's exciting for me when that happens. So.
Right. You leave it a little bit up to the viewer's imagination to like complete the image in their minds.
Exactly. And you could feel that, the other one, the 2001 and this one, they feel very much like performances. You could see that the cartoon imagery has this kind of strictness, and yet the free-flowing line was done by hand. It was not done in the computer or anything like that. It was done by hand, and people could feel in both drawings the performative aspect of the creation, like in Keltie's work too. The work Sequel or the blue one, they both have that performative, like on stage doing it. I think here is more like a frontal stage, and in Keltie's could be on the floor or frontal. So I think in the show is so important that it's three kinds of performances, basically. Three kinds of approaching how to activate drawing and painting, through this gesture, basically.
Yeah, I'm also thinking a lot about like the openness to chance in the process, going back to like Cage's influence on Trisha, for example, and your both simultaneous interest in providing like a roadmap, but also allowing those moments of letting the material take you where it wants to take you, right? Or introducing things you don't have control over.
Or by chance, for example, I mean, I didn't know what this was going to look like because I cut it from the back. So the end result was like, okay, let's see it now. And whatever it was a chance operation, basically.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had seen it entirely as gestural or abstract, which is a tendency of mine not to see imagery, honestly. And then I took my 6-year-old in to see the show, and we spent like 10 minutes in front of this work, finding every minute little character in the coloring books, and talking about every color change, and because like the strips are so tiny, and then there's these little tiny images on the strips, and then as we were talking, the all the imagery and the castle emerged for me. So it was a really beautiful and slow experience to see it differently, and it took quite a while.
I think there is a close-up in the next slide, I think. Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, it's not.
No, we should.
Okay. Oh, well, you can see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
You can see
thank
the
you.
content of the typography, all the stuff that, is there. Yeah. So.
Yeah, you see like the back, it looks like almost like there's a blurb on the back of the coloring book and the
Yeah.
barcode and
Barcode, name, price. Yeah. Just, it's crazy.
how did you become interested in cartoons?
Well, I think this you find as, in the Salvation Army or Goodwill. So when I moved to New York, I had no money. And so I didn't have money for oils or anything like that. So I just bought all books and colorful with available color, basically. So that's how I started with this very cheap materials. And I was able to glue them together and cut them up to produce this kind of stuff in a very kind of budget process, basically. So that was the idea, that was available by everywhere they have it, so it's easy to get. So
Nice, thank you. Shall we go to the next slide? Thank you. And then Keltie, this is the one black and white work by you in the show, which stood out to me, I guess, because Trisha's work is all just charcoal. And so in a way, this is a nice pairing within the show. But how how did you think about constructing this one? Like color felt so important in the others, and then this shift to just like the line feels so foregrounded here.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, most of my work, I end up going down some color intensity, adventure. But this is from the pandemic, and I always draw. I mean, I have lots, but I generally draw and then put it in a drawer and get back to painting. And so there was something about the difficulty during the pandemic was that I had been at the height of these relief works, which I was working with an assistant, because just making that much thick paint was just in and of itself, just and cutting out all the stencils, the work had become very laborious and slow and social, therefore. And so when the pandemic hit, I never had like my process just so interrupted by outside forces, especially like large geopolitical forces. And I couldn't do what I had been doing, which was really, really deeply upsetting at the time, of course, on top of everything else, which was even more upsetting. But so I was like, oh, I had to I reminded myself that I am an artist and I can continue on without all the support structures that I normally have. And I draw all the time, and I can respect that and make some works out of it. And this was one of them that came from that process, which was sort of the idea of taking my drawings and literally, I don't know, giving it, I don't know, the stage that I give my paintings, even if that's just in my mind, and giving game in a large format. And so this was also where this idea that became, I don't know, got more best formulated, or began to be formulated, of these lines, or like rivers of vectors crossing through each other, and one set of lines being the actual line, and then the other set being the erasure marks, which kind of go through the line and create another set of rhythms. So it's like two rhythms on top of each other, I guess. So that's.
And is there like a sequence to your method of drawing and erasing?
It's mostly drawing first and erasing second, but I think there's a little bit going back into it. But by and large, that's what it is. And I think in this painting, ironically, where it's darkest might be where the erasure happened the most. So, I mean, you really have to see this in real life. I mean, it's, to my eye right here, it's like, I need to put my glasses on, but it's like a field of vibrations. I don't know, passing through each other, like as waves of all, like when you're in the ocean and there's two sets of currents and they're passing through each other, but they both sort of stay intact. That's kind of what I think of when I think of this. And also, of course, just I think there was some, I think the anxiety of the moment was also present in this. So.
Yeah.
In this part, in Shook and Sequel, Keltie, they to me, they seemed like that canvas is a giant stage, and you were inside that doing it. And
Yes.
seeing the yellow, such wonderful movement, and then the shocking negative spaces, the fake ones, just saying hello to you, and you just have to deal with it. And then this one feels just like that it could go on forever, because it is made while you were on this standing or doing it on the wall, whatever, but it feels so about the memory of the body.
Yeah.
And that is very fascinating and very satisfying. So
thank you. Yeah, I did do a wall work of this in this show from 2021. I did a 15 by 30 foot wall, just drawing it, and it was at Mitchell, Ennis and Nash, and it was an extremely satisfying, shockingly easy experience, because I just didn't know until I did it whether it would work, especially at that scale. Because I mean, I did maybe a quarter size rehearsal in my studio, But it was, I don't know, it felt shockingly right. Like, oh, this could just go on. And I felt like afterwards I was, oh, I could have done the whole gallery and it would have just been like taking deep breaths. But thank you. Yeah. It's, yeah. Still figuring out what to do with all that, I guess, that moment, because it was such a distinct moment from the rest of life, before and after.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and continuing in some ways too.
Yeah, totally.
The title Shook, it has this kind of, I mean, it's such like you said, vibrational, but really embodied, like the idea of an aftershock of like being shaken up, of like not almost like not knowing what to do with oneself. So you kind of do this repetitive action too. There's
Yeah,
maybe an anxiety.
totally. I think that's all. Yeah, I think there is some fear in there. Totally.
If we go to the next slide. Yeah, so this work isn't in the show, but Keltie, I couldn't not think about your body prints while looking at those Trisha Brown drawings, because just thinking about like the residue of the body in two-dimensional form, um, and the afterlife of of hands, feet, any kind of body parts on a page or a canvas. And also thinking about like working on a wall or the floor. These felt really germane to me. Could you talk to us a little bit about this one?
Yeah, this was in my last show at Mitchell and Nash, just about a year ago. And it's I've been making these body prints for 10 years now, in kind of in parallel to my painting practice. I make them by covering myself in a kind of non-toxic oil, and then sort of doing some sort of push up or yoga onto a horizontal canvas or paper, and then dusting pigment onto the surface and it coming off. This process was just totally lifted 100% from David Hammond's and Jasper Johns, who are the only two artists that I know of that have seriously done this kind of process where the pigment and oil are combined in the process of making the body print, and which essentially is oil paint, by the way. Like, if you think about it, like those are the two components of oil paint being made in an image. And I could go, I've made a lot of a singular image, and then I've been recently trying to do more groups of, I don't know, of dynamic actors. I don't know. And I often think of
Dynamic actors, meaning repetitions of yourself, because even
yeah,
here you see multiple bodies, they're all you, yes, and
yeah,
it's
they're all,
like, and you get
yeah.
an unfolding over time.
Yeah, so far I haven't had anybody else into the studio. I don't want them to go in a Kleinian direction of me being like some mastermind directing like more beautiful people than me. Like I want it to be like more about I don't like that sort of like I don't want to be like the grand manipulator of other people. I wanted it to be related to self-portraiture, of like a self-portrait of the artist. So they started off. I started off in the buff making them, which to me, like at the first, was like the idea of just like making just me and dust, like, and making an image out of it. But then that sort of became more about like the nude and then I was like, oh, I don't want to go towards that. I want to go towards like the artist or just me in the studio making things or trying to make things. So I now do them almost totally, clothed in like jeans and a t-shirt or a button down, which is just what I wear all, every day. I don't know.
And you still make them?
Oh yeah, yeah. I still make them. I generally make them in the summer because that's when it's the weather is right. It's a it's a for being covered in oil. Like you don't want to be too hot or too cold for that process. Uh, but yeah, I mean, obviously, I was really very. I definitely was. I think in my mind thinking of things people like Trisha Brown or Pollock, in addition to you know, I mean, they're very dance-like, and I could go on and on. Make them, it's and then also again about the intensity of color. I mean, this is like they're very bright and intense because that's straight up cadmium red, cadmium yellow, and cobalt blue. So they've become more and more about like the intensity of that pigment.
And you make them on paper and canvas, both.
Yeah, they were on canvas for the first 10 years or so, and I recently have been doing them on paper. I mean on canvas. And they're canvas on panel because I have to get on them. Like they have to be able to support my weight in a way that a stretcher wouldn't. And yeah. And so that's been interesting to have them not framed and not behind glass, and they're not nearly as fragile when they're on canvas, though they're harder to make because I realize how much I use the bendability of the paper when I do them on paper to like to manipulate the pigment. But so it's I've only made like, I don't know, 7 or 8 of them on canvas so far.
Okay.
We just have a few slides left, and then we'll go to the Q&A. If we could go to the next slide, Min. This just shows you kind of that last gallery. Next slide. Next slide. Keltie, if there's anything you want to say about this work, I believe the slides after this are Trisha's drawings, which the ones from the earlier ones that are more systematic, Arturo, that you kind of mentioned. We could go to those and talk to those as well, or talk about those as well.
If anyone has any, I'd rather leave more space for questions. If anyone has questions about this, I'm happy to answer them. But most of what has been said about everything else could be applied to this.
Great. If we could go to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. Arturo, these were I feel like you said something really nice about these early drawings before.
Yeah, I think these are a little bit late, but in between. And I think for Trisha is about points in space, trajectories that could be uncertain or totally certain, and possibilities of how things could move or not move. And so these small drawings are amazingly generous too, because you could be in them for a long, long time trying to discover them, what she was thinking about, and it's about placement basically. So
yeah, if we could go to the next slide.
And it's great to have this with Keltie's Black Shook painting. So it's fantastic to have together.
Yeah. Yeah, they're so focused. It's almost like it's like a mental exercise, particularly, and I think the next one, if we go to the next one. Yeah, from 86, and she does those locus schematics in the 70s. So this is later, but you still see her thinking through the cube and like the limits of the square and then what possibilities exist within the square.
I mean,
Next
this is
slide.
a seemingly simple drawing, but it's very powerful. So
yeah. And then this one, which feels, you get the organic movement within the confines of that structure in the cube.
Yep. I mean, they could be seen as from above, of seeing the shoulders and the hips and the feet, and or it could be frontal too. I mean, so it's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. I know we're at 2:00. It was a pleasure to speak with you, and I think we'll go into some audience Q&A.
Thanks for leading us.
Of course.
Thank you, everyone. That was such a wonderful conversation. Just a reminder, we have a link in the chat where you can submit questions and I can ask on your behalf, or you can ask questions to Keltie and Arturo. Thank you, Martha, for such thoughtful questions. I can ask the first question. I feel like there's like the sense of like push and pull, like between this additive and subtractive practices. There's a substantial amount of sort of strokes, but also erasure. There's also cutting out parts of like your collage process seem to have a layering practice, but also the ways in which you can you subtract to create form. And I was wondering if there's any relation to this sort of push and pull and this adding and subtracting process, or how that process relates to the body. And especially because we started off this conversation talking about performance and how both of you are thinking a lot about the body's motion and how that translates into your paintings and drawings. How I was wondering if that back and forth process that I see in both of your practices have anything to do with the ways in which you think about the body.
Well, I think the in this show, I think is a amazing opportunity that the three of us came together, because it really is, the body is a tool for drawing, basically, or for making art, and three different approaches to the process. But I think the energy and I think the power of line and the power of the negative spaces, the power of the erasures and the markings, all that stuff is there, and it's very, very powerful. But the installation being so minimal, it allows each of the works to be able to reverberate with the audience, and how each you can, go to the next work with the information from the last one. I think the installation is really superb by Michael Jenkins. So I'm very happy to be at the show, and so.
Yeah, it is interesting how there's that through line, literally of line, and then erasure or negative space. Like, and we all do it differently in different works. I don't know, but I don't have anything more. I don't have anything more profound to add. But it is really striking, and you're right. And the negative space, the space between the works as well. Anyway, yeah.
And our next question is from Fong.
Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, you all. I'm dying to see the show. I just came back from traveling, so I'm super curious. But I remember one talking to Trisha when she collaborated this project with Terry Winters, because he often collaborate with artists. And we once talked about Bruegel's painting, Blind Leading the Blind. And she was talking about in her dance, sometimes she wishes she's blind, which is very interesting to think about it. And then we ended up talking about how jazz came out of Delta blues. You know, it's so interesting because when you look at early Delta blues, a lot of great blues master in the 20s, the 30s, people like Blind Blake, Blind Lemon Jefferson, Blind Boy Fuller, you name it, Lead Belly. They all amazing guitar players that create amazing, rapturous, unpredictable rhythm. And the amplification of lacking the sense of hearing is all developed highly so with the sense of touch, you know? So I wonder, since your own, you create your own rhythm. I mean, what Min is talking about push and pull is go beyond the negative and positive space, which is very famously created by Hans Hofmann when he was teaching in the 40s, But I think what I meant to ask both of you is that the sense of rhythm, does the rhythm have a sense of audio, or sense of touch? Because it's obviously it's different between your rhythm, Arturo, and Keltie's rhythm, And recently, I also been reading a great deal about Hannah Arendt. There's a great book came out just 4 years ago by Jerome Cohn, a good friend of mine, and it's called Thinking Without the Banister, which implies that can you walk up and down the stairs without the need to rest the hands on the handrail? So I love to see whether you can both explore on that process, because I know Keltie is very impatient, very expressive, but in some ways she's very measured. He's been so measured all from the career early on, and I follow your work the same for a long time too. So I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit on that aspects.
I mean, I think what you're saying is really interesting about blindness, or like not seeing or feeling instead of seeing, or seeing texture, which is almost because the drawings for me, I try not to look often at what I'm doing, where I try, and there's a lot of Gustin's work, a lot of his or he was imagining or hoping to do, especially from his abstractions, to make something. Step, he would try to paint without stepping back and not taking in the full effect, being lost in the detail, lost in the texture, and not. And I do think that is a way of getting me. I don't know if I have like a great answer to this, but it is like a way of getting into the feel and into yourself as you work, rather than thinking of it as like from someone else's point of view, like the finished product, or the done thing, or even the concept. Like, so I think it's an interesting way of like entering your other senses by denying the primary sense that from which we all in the end experience this work, is with our eyes. I don't know. I think there's something interesting, and I do think something that's, I didn't talk about all my paintings in the show have these big swath of erasures that are this negative, where I literally like wipe away, but it's the spray paint marks to make, and there's something about like that negative mark is almost like the most bodily.
It's interesting you were describing that Guston in you referring to only a brief period of his life, 66, 67, 68, leading to the figuration in 1970. You're absolutely right about that. He had to obliterate what have gone before, the lyrical abstraction, or they call abstract impressionist paintings, you know. So when he were making those paintings, Keltie, you describing, is exactly one-shot painting, so to speak. How the body can be up against the pressure of the hand. If you look at early Stanley Whitney, it have very similar mediation of the body, exactly you describe, but in repetition, obviously, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that thought, Keltie. Arturo?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I work with music all the time in the studio, and it's mostly classical music, and it's mostly, I will say, orchestral music and some dance music like ballet music. So the making of the pieces always is informed by music, not by specific CDs or anything like that, but I need the music to be able to move forward on the process of building the structure, basically. And
Yeah.
sometimes listening to Bach or Mahler or something like that, it helps me figure it out somehow. But once they're out of the studio and frame, for me, they don't have any soundtrack. They are completely, they are basically kind of presented to the viewer so they can make their own kind of narrative without me telling them that I listen to Mahler Fifth, the Adagio or whatever, or that it's not important. So in the studio, heavily music influence, yet when they're outside, no soundtrack. So
Well, your line is very classical. Shall we say that?
It is very classical, as you can see. Perfect cuts and order and structure. Yeah, it is the classical. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So you are the Ancre, and then Celtic will be Delacroix. I don't know.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, you guys. Is Mark still here? Chloe? Man, she left?
No, she had to leave early, so it's
Okay.
just
Cool. Well, anyway, thank you, you guys. Can't wait to see your show. Congratulations. And yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful show, and I've been following your work for so long. So I can't wait to see how that dialogue in the visual term when I come see it tomorrow. So very excited. So congratulations, Keltie.
Thank you, Fawn, for having.
Yeah, great pleasure for us. Back to you.
Okay.
Thank you, Fong, for that question. Thank you, Keltie, Arturo, and Martha. Thank you, Scott and Monica from Sycamore Melloway Jenkins for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And you can join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Tacita Dean, Edmund DeWall, Dr. Eliche Enzabella, Joel Meyerowitz, Luke Toymans, and Amanda Gluibisi on the occasion of Giorgio Morandi masterpieces from the Menani Roca Foundation at Davis Werner. And as it is a Rail tradition, you can now turn on your microphone and say goodbye as you leave. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank
you. Thank you, Keltie.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
It's a great show. Really great show.
Thank you so much.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank
you. So excited to go to the show as a team.
Yes. Congratulations. And go see the show for those of you who haven't seen it. I know some of you will be watching it again over the weekend, the next few days. Let's go see the show.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much.